Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of Flag for Discussion. My name is Farbode Merkazi, here as always with Jace Hatfield. This episode is going to be a little bit different though.
Farbode and I have bachelor parties, weddings, soon to be honeymoons. It's that time of the year for us.
It's the season of life. It's not even just the time of the year.
Hopefully our one and only weddings and our one and only honeymoons. But this episode will be a best of edition of Flag for Discussion. So we're going to have some of our best clips from the season, playoff talk, our best moments, and more.
Yeah, so basically, as what Jay said, whatever we cut for this week's episode is going to be in the title. Hopefully, you'll sit back, relax, enjoy. Make sure you check us out on all of our socials, Flag for Discussion, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Twitter at F4Discussion, and TikTok at Flag4Discussion. We will be back soon to react live to everything college football. This is just, like we said, a season of life for us. So thanks so much for tuning in. Penn State's Pat Kraft. Now, I can't remember a time when a public figure created a 180 in terms of public image in a span of 2 days faster than Pat Kraft did. Now, you and I feel differently than how Penn State fans feel about Pat Kraft right now. I've seen Penn State fans, after the leaked audio that came out, they're all celebrating him. They're all loving him. They're saying that's from the heart. Now, if for you at home, if you haven't heard the leaked audio, Pat Kraft was in a team meeting with like 9 or 10 football players, and all he did was just destroy and threat and smear every other program's name.
Even his former coach, even coaches that had just left the program, he was smearing them too.
And Oregon, like he said, Oregon's full of a bunch of fucking weirdos. That's his quote, not mine. He came out after during the introductory press conference for Matt Campbell, and he goes, "I apologize to anyone that I may have offended with the video that leaked. It was 9 or 10 football players that wanted to come in and sit down, and we had an open and honest discussion, but I fell short of the standard that I should represent for all those people, all my staff that sits up there, all 833 athletes that I represent. I can't apologize enough for those who I may have offended, and well, I got to be better." Look, my opinion on this before we get to Campbell, I think I texted it to you. You can't pretend you're one way in one setting and pretend you're another way in a public setting and choose and hope that I believe that that's who you are in the public setting, because we now have seen what you are in a private setting. Maybe it's because you want to seem cool to the kids. Maybe it's because you were just having an open and honest discussion. But the things that you were saying, maybe that's your true beliefs. But as a athletic director of a top-tier Power 4 program, can you imagine Rob Mullins, a leaked audio of him coming out, destroying like USC and Washington, even if they are the
I'd hate it.
Yeah. And this is also before Penn State hired a coach, and this was like through day 54 of a hiring cycle. So I don't love the fact that Pat Kraft is still the AD at Penn State, but he got his guy somehow. I don't know if you read the story. Penn State tried to reach out to Matt Campbell in October, and they reached out to the wrong Matt Campbell or the wrong person. I
heard that story. I don't buy it for a single second. That was to me like, the truth is Matt Campbell was coach number 34 on our list. We can't Pat Kraft, because it literally in the leaked audio, Pat Kraft admits multiple times that his ass is on the line. His ass is going to get fired if he doesn't make the right move. You know, he won't let himself be the guy that ruined Penn State, because how stupid could you be if you fuck up Penn State? Like, his words. If he, like, there's no way on earth he's ever going to admit that Matt Campbell was like the 19th option and that they struck out on everybody else. So I think he was just totally making up some bullshit that was like, oh, we got the wrong. Who gets the wrong Matt? You're fucking Penn State, dude. You're the athletic director.
Yeah.
How are you getting the wrong damn Matt Campbell? Like, that's such, and if that's a real story, that's damn near more embarrassing. Like,
so
how
that's what I
stupid are
think.
you? Like,
that's what I think. I think that they actually contacted the wrong guy. I think that's more emblematic of the search, and they like just gave up on Matt Campbell at that point. Buddy, you were in the search 54 days later, and as it's been chronicled, like Matt Campbell kind of shuts off the noise during the season, every year and doesn't want to address coaching stuff until after his last regular season game. That might be false. Maybe at home he does look at other potential opportunities, but at least what's been reported, what's been chronicled, and now through Campbell's actions, he didn't take a job until his last regular season game at Iowa State. So I wouldn't be surprised if Pat Kraft did contact the wrong Matt Campbell and then just gave up from there. Like that's just a ridiculous story. The show was emblematic to how messy this search was. Now, I have a feeling we're going to disagree on how good the hire is for Penn State, but I'm going to set the ball up on a tee for you by saying this. I think Penn State stumbled, fell, and walked their ass backwards, fell on a bunch of glass, and somehow ended up with the right hire. Now, what do you think?
All right. I don't love this fit of Matt Campbell and Penn State. And the reason being, I think, and when I said this, I've been saying this the whole time. When you fire James Franklin, you fire him because you wanted to take the next step, which is premier, elite, year in, year out, national champions, raising a trophy, elite. James Franklin could get you almost all the way there, but he was never a good enough coach to take that next step. You fire him because you want that next step. That's totally fine. I respect the expectations. You feel like your program's in a spot that's a fair expectation. Matt Campbell, to me, seems like a coach who is kind of like James Franklin in the sense that he's a good game manager. He's a good scheme coach, but he's never going to be innovative on offense or innovative on defense to the point where teams are trying to steal plays from him, trying to steal his looks. He doesn't really strike me as a guy who's going to out-scheme Ryan Day and Dan Lanning and whoever Michigan ends up hiring or Kurt Signetti. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to out-coach them. He doesn't really strike me as a guy that's going to out-recruit in the Big Ten. Penn State, I think, recruited as well as it did because of James Franklin. And I know this is true because Pat Kraft in his leaked audio said, who the fuck wants to come to, middle of nowhere, Happy Valley? We're in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to get people here. Matt Campbell is not an elite recruiter. He wasn't at Iowa State. All of his 3 stars or even a couple 4 stars that he got through his tenure there were all kids from Ames, Iowa, or from throughout the state of Iowa. He's not going to light up. Yeah, he's a good evaluator, but is a good evaluator got you to be consistently good, not great in the Big 12? A good evaluation of a Pennsylvania 3-star is not going to beat Oregon. It's not going to beat Ohio State. It's not going to beat Michigan. It's not going to beat Indiana. It's not going to beat USC. It's not going to beat Washington consistently. I just don't think Matt Campbell is the coach that takes them to that next elite level that Penn State wanted. If anything, I think he just continues to be a 8-4 on a window year will be 10-2 kind of coach. And Matt Campbell wasn't a home run hire to me. I also don't think he Pat Kraft and what Penn State we've just found out is they have this fiery energy where they just want to we just got to fucking win now. As he was going in that leaked audio. Matt Campbell is in his interview with Josh Pate was oh, I'm just so humble and so thankful and I just want to be with my family. And that's great. He's a great guy. And I love that. That's very Iowa State in the Big 12. That is not, we got to fucking win a championship. We got to fucking win one now. That is not the energy that I see working. I don't see Pat Kraft guy who's going to come in and trash everybody under the sun that's not in the room with him and just be kind of a terrible human. I don't see that really boding well with Matt Campbell, who's kind of a good, seems more like a good guy. I want to do this the right way. They just don't seem compatible. And like I said, Matt Campbell isn't the guy that's going to go pull a bunch of 4 and 5 stars from the South and then go into Autzen Stadium and out scheme Dan Lanning. That's just not who Matt Campbell is. He's never been that.
All right. I see your point. I don't disagree with all of that. I also like the fact that we're disagreeing on something. I think based off of a lot of the things that he did at Iowa State, you can translate that at a higher level at Penn State. Iowa State was never supposed to be even a window program. Before Matt Campbell, they had I think you could count on one hand the amount of good years they had as a football program. And Matt Campbell didn't make them an elite program, but he made them what we always say is, he's going to recruit, he's going to evaluate, and he's going to bring in the guys that he thinks he can develop so then they can look at down the road 2 years, 3 years from now. That is our window. That's Iowa State football under Matt Campbell, and he did a hell of a job. He also, in his press conference, mentioned that Iowa State's like resources were so lacking that they had to build their GM had to build their own collective. They didn't have a collective built for them, like a lot of other Power Four programs. It's like my opinion is, you're right. He could have a ceiling as a head coach, but I'm very interested to see what his evaluation process, what his development process, what his staffing with higher resources, with greater access to the best of the best players could look like at a Penn State. Now, I think also Matt Campbell's just one of the better humans to be a head football coach, so I root for the guy. Just not that I know him, but from like watching his journey for the last 10 years and his press conferences, interviews, like not every coach is a good human. You want your coach to be a good human. I think Penn State found a good human. I think in general, look, I guess my question for you is, who would have been that hire for you at Penn State?
There's like probably a list of any of the guys that said no to them. So that's like 20 people I think would have been good hires. Like and then people that I don't even know the names of, but like I'll keep going back to this example when like Oregon went after Dan Lanning or when Notre Dame went after Marcus Freeman. Like even there's got to be a handful of coaches that I think were worth the shot that are on that tier that they probably could have gone after. And like I said, when you fire someone in October, you kind of expect you're doing that due diligence for the 54 days that this went on for. And my thing with Matt Campbell, the reason why you fired James Franklin when you did is to get ahead on the search and either find that gem that you think could be a gem, or it's to get the big name guy. You didn't find a gem. We kind of know who Matt Campbell is by now in his career. And I think Matt Campbell has a 55% win percentage at Iowa State. He only won double-digit games once. He only won 3 bowl games, one of them, his biggest one being the COVID year bowl game, where they were one of few teams to actually play a significant amount of games. He's a good coach and he's a good guy and you root for him, but he's not the hidden gem hire that you fire a coach early for, and he's not the home run hire that's going to come in and win a national championship. And I think he was fun. Like he only won, like I said, he won 9 games once, he won 11 games once. 8 games twice in 2017, 2018, and then every other year was 7 or less. He was doing that in the Big 12. Yes, he's going to have access to a little bit, to significantly more money, a little bit better recruiting pipelines, but like Penn State is not, you're not recruiting, like Penn State to me is not a destination program where like a 5-star is coming to Penn State because you're Penn State. That's part of it, obviously, but they also were committing to James Franklin, and we really know that that's true because now that James Franklin's at Virginia Tech, look at what happened to all of those commits. They all commit to James Franklin at Virginia Tech. They weren't committed to Virginia Tech. They were committing to James Franklin. I don't know if Matt Campbell is the type of recruiter, and he's never even really had to even try to recruit to the way that Penn State's going to want him to recruit. How does that go when all of a sudden Penn State's like, shit, this guy can't sign 4 and 5 stars. He can't close the deal. And we don't have the branding to bring him in. Like if Matt Campbell shows up to your house and then the next day Ryan Day shows up, from his Ohio State gear, and then the next day Kurt Signetti, and then the next day it's Dan Lanning. How many of those guys are going to be going to Matt Campbell and Penn State? I don't think too many. No, it just worries me.
I agree.
It worries me.
I agree on that part. Here's what I'll say. I think he's an excellent head football coach, and I'm curious to see how his build at Iowa State with far fewer resources, far fewer staff, far fewer help can take that and translate that with a war chest of resources at Penn State. How can they turn their process at Iowa State into a machine at Penn State? Now, I have a twofold concern for this hire because I have no idea if it will work out. I'm just really curious and excited to see if it will. My concern in general, number one, you fired James Franklin. You fired a regular 9 to 11 game winner because you wanted better, like you mentioned. If Matt Campbell, if he does go out and sign 4 and 5 stars, like you're concerned, if he does go out and develop similar to how he did at Iowa State, but they're still never over the hump of beating the Oregons, the Ohio States, the Michigans, At what point do we have the conversation of is that Penn State's ceiling as a program, not necessarily their coach? And my other concern is, look, it's no secret Penn State's in a mini rebuild right now. Now, I trust that Campbell and his staff are like already working the phones diligently and rapidly to go get as much of a head start on the transfer portal that's going to open in January. But with that said, we don't know. With so many of like Matt Campbell took over the job, and I think Penn State signed 2 guys on early National Signing Day. I'm sure they're going to go sign like 10 more guys by National Signing Day and take over the portal and bring in a ton of guys there. But they're not going to be ready made to win 10 games, 11 games next year unless Campbell does just an unbelievable job bringing in guys, or he finds a way to get Rocco Beck to go with him to Penn State or whatever. My 2 concerns are, how does the program look at this if in 4 years they still haven't gotten over the hump, and now they're looking at in the mirror of, is this a Penn State issue? Is this an athletic department issue? What are we doing wrong? Not necessarily the football coach. And the second one is how college football is all about momentum. The second one is, if your momentum next year starts out so slow because you will have to be in a mini rebuild, how does that take the Matt Campbell train off the tracks a little bit going forward at Penn State?
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point, and especially your first concern. There's a nugget in there that I like, and it's kind of, you were talking about what happens if it's not successful. Does that change the ceiling in which we view Penn State in? And I think the answer is like undoubtedly yes. That does change the way that we would see their ceiling, and I think part of me, to kind of like keep pushing this a little bit, part of me feels. So Indiana was a program that everybody, even Kurt Cignetti has said himself, when he got there, he could feel the loser mentality within the building, that nobody really believed in their program. You turn a program like that, which is obviously way lower than the ceiling than Penn State, you turn that into a championship caliber program by hiring the gem, by finding the gem and hiring him, bringing him in. Kurt Cignetti was that gem, and they found it, and they hired him, they brought him in, and now look at him. Matt Campbell, I can almost promise you, is not that gem. And I think for me, that's kind of why I'm like, why are we doing the James Franklin dance again? You just fired Matt Campbell. Why are we hiring Matt Campbell? I purposefully said his name twice there. I really feel like you just kind of went lateral, so I think you're dead on with your first fear.
I think my only pushback on that take, and I said it to you in the past, is if you put the smartest people in the room at Penn State, I don't know if they could have found the gem. That's not a knock on the smartest people in the world. I don't know if that's a knock on Penn State. I think Indiana didn't know that Kurt Cignetti was the gem that they hired. And then now that they found, we got a rocket ship ready to explode here, now there's even more expectations and resources, and he's become the gem. Marcus Freeman, you mentioned, he was on Brian Kelly's staff. He was the defensive coordinator. So Notre Dame had a couple years at least to get to know the guy, and the players begged for his hiring, and they turned him from DC to interim head coach to head coach. Dan Lanning, yes, you're right. He was a gem. But I just personally believe if you're going out there looking for the Kurt Cignettis, the Dan Lannings of the world, maybe there is one. Maybe Bob Chesney at UCLA is. I just listened to his press conference. It sounded great. I'm hopeful for UCLA going forward. Maybe Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas is the gem. Maybe Alex Golish, even though I don't know if he would be considered a gem because he was very well known. Maybe he's the gem at Auburn. In general, I think my point is we don't know who a gem is until they're the gem. Until
but that's the risk you have to take, right? That's the risk you have to take. Like when you fire a 10-2 guy, you have to be a gem. We would know if Matt Campbell. Yeah. If Matt Campbell was a gem, we would know by now. He's been a Division I Power 4 coach for a decade. Like if he was a gem, we would know. Like none of these other guys we're talking about were head coaches at the Power 4 level beforehand. Like there was their first gig that they got that took them on to that next step. And I think you take I think the kind of my argument is you take that risk. You might hire a dud. You might hire a Billy Napier and you set your program back. But you might hire the gem, the guy that turns your program around. And when you fire James Franklin because he wasn't winning the championships, he wasn't doing enough to be at the top level, you got to take you either hire a guy that's already at that level, which they tried and they failed. Okay, well, if we can't get a guy that we know can take us there, then fuck, let's go take a shot on a guy that might have a chance to. To me, they did the really safe play. They did the, hey, we're always going to be better than 6 wins. Unfortunately, you'll probably never be better than 10. And I think I'm like, what? You just fired the guy that you're bringing in is going to do exactly the thing that you just fired the previous guy for. And I just feel like you're just kind of setting Matt Campbell up to fail in the sense of your expectations and where he'll reside. Now, from Matt Campbell's perspective, you're going to get paid an unbelievable amount of money to coach football, and that's great. I'll never consider that failing. But you got to take that risk, man. If you're firing James Franklin, you got to take that risk. If you want to win a national championship, you either need to hire a guy that you know can win one or hire a guy that could maybe potentially win one. I feel comfortable saying I know Matt Campbell will probably never.
I'm going to clip that. I'm not sure if he ever will, but I think we got to keep that on. I think overall we agree, but a lot of that is because of Penn State. I just think, like I said, I don't like the risk is worth it until you have hired the bad risk. Like the risk for Florida hiring the gem was worth it until you're in year 2 of Billy Napier and have to pay him $30 million to leave. The risk is worth it until until you realize, shoot, man, should have just gone with the safe play. But you're absolutely right. You fire James Franklin to upgrade, and it's really hard to upgrade from the coach and the amount of success James Franklin was bringing into Penn State. And at this point, there's very few coaches you could have hired that would have felt like slam dunks because, for what it's worth, James Franklin won a lot of games there. James Franklin was very successful there. James Franklin has his flaws. We've made fun of him. We've joked about him. we have believed against him. Jace has been on the record. I have too, saying we're not James Franklin guys. But I'm kind of rooting for him at Virginia Tech right now. And I think a lot of that is I want him to prove that, like, he's a really good program builder. He's a good coach. And I know my camera's gone blurry, but there's a very good chance that Penn State has hired a replacement of James Franklin in Matt Campbell, who is James Franklin. I will buy that argument from you, that they basically just took off the disguise, and if he takes off his costume, it's just James Franklin all over. I'll buy that.
Like a Scooby-Doo.
We have to talk about Lane Kiffin, right? So Lane Kiffin, for the last, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, he's been the toast of the town, the belle of the ball of the SEC. Every LSU opens, he's their first call. Florida opens, he's their first call. Lane is quietly just sitting at Ole Miss, winning games, the offense looking really good. Ends up finishing with the greatest regular season in Ole Miss history. They're heading to the playoff spot. They're going to probably have the opportunity to host the home game. And Lane clearly was under the impression that he was going to be allowed to coach in that game in the playoffs for Ole Miss. Because as everyone knows how the last week and a half or so has gone on, Lane Kiffin was being courted. His family was making trips to Gainesville. His family was making trips to Baton Rouge, trying to decide where the best option for Lane was. And for a long time, I was in the camp that Lane's trolling everybody. Lane's trying to set up Florida and LSU for bad hires, propelling himself at Ole Miss even more. The other argument was Lane had reached a place in his life in a coaching staff. And granted, I don't know Lane, but from the outside looking in, he had reached a place in his career as a coach that he didn't need the extra bit, the reach out for whatever you need. Instead of he was happy. That was the stories that were coming out. He was, for the first time in a long time, he was content and stable and happy to be where he's been. I mean, that guy has been a coach since he was super young. His dad's his hero, and he's gone through the ringer as a coach. I just assumed Lane would look out and be like, Ole Miss might name the stadium, name this field after me. There might be a statue of me outside this field, and maybe my ceiling at Ole Miss is a first round or second round playoff exit. But that in its entirety is better than being that guy that jumps around the SEC, potentially inserting myself in a position that I think I can win in at LSU or Florida. But what if it goes wrong? Florida just fired their coach after a couple years. LSU just fired their coach after a couple years. Their coach who had been winning 9-10 games. I mean, we have faults about Brian Kelly, sure, but it's not like Brian Kelly wasn't winning a good amount of games. It's not like he had bottomed out the program. So all of that said, going into this weekend, I didn't really know what to believe, what to think. Lane Kiffin goes to the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State. They beat him 38-19. Lane Kiffin puts out a pretty passionate address at halftime talking about how their guys, them being Mississippi State, are trying to fight his guys, his being obviously Ole Miss, and really standing up for his team. And I think that's obviously an aspect of like a coach standing up for his players rather than just being Ole Miss. But you kind of had a feeling at that point that, oh, maybe he is considering staying at Ole Miss. And then I texted Jace this. I kind of expected him to tweet out the Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not fucking leaving meme, and just to show everyone that he just took Florida and LSU on for a ride and led them on. But lo and behold, Marty Smith, Pete Thamel, all the people who have been covering this reported that today there was a team meeting. It was eventually pushed to the afternoon because Lane Kiffin wanted to meet with his current staff, and he told his offensive staffers that if you're not on the plane to Baton Rouge, you're not going to be on the staff at that point. Lane Kiffin shortly after released this tweet. After a lot of prayer and time spent with family, I made the difficult decision to accept the head coaching position at LSU. I was hoping to complete a historic season run with this year's team by leading Ole Miss through the playoffs, capitalizing on the team's success and their commitment to finish strong and investing everything into a playoff run with guardrails in place to protect the program in any areas of concern. My request to do so was denied by Keith Carter, despite the team also asking him to allow me to coach them, keep coaching them so they could maintain their higher level of play. Jeez, I'm reading terribly. Unfortunately, that means Friday's Egg Bowl was my last game coaching the Rebels. While I'm looking forward to a new start with a unique opportunity at LSU, I will forever cherish the incredible 6 years I spent at Ole Miss and will be rooting hard for the team to complete their mission and bring a championship to Oxford. Lane Kiffin. So that was Lane's announcement that he was leaving Ole Miss, going to LSU. Shortly thereafter, we saw him board a plane from Oxford, land in Baton Rouge. We saw fans at the Oxford airport flipping him off. We saw fans at the LSU campus and at the Baton Rouge airport greeting him. It's just wild. Ole Miss threw his clothes out onto the street. Ole Miss basically told him, you're not allowed in even our meeting room to say goodbyes to the players. So it's not a pretty exit. And a tweet that went up today on our Twitter account at F4 Discussion, by the way, Lane Kiffin's exit history hasn't been pretty in the past either. I mean, he got fired publicly by a projector with Al Davis in the Raiders. He left Tennessee late at night on some random January night to take the USC job. He was tarmacked at USC. He took the FAU job, was about to coach the national title game, and Nick Saban told him to kick rocks, basically, saying, you're being a distraction to our team as the offensive coordinator. We'll have someone else call plays. You go be the head coach at FAU. He's not the best at being graceful in his exits, but it's happened. It's done now. Pete Golding, the DC of Ole Miss, is going to be the permanent head coach at Ole Miss. They made a quick hire. I don't know if that's a great hire, but I don't know if it's a bad one. It's kind of the Sherrone Moore thing. I don't love it when teams make a quick hire just promoting someone from their current staff instead of making a national search to make sure you have the right guy. But look, that guy knows Ole Miss. He's been at Alabama. He was Nick Saban's defensive coordinator for a while before becoming Lane Kiffin's defensive coordinator. That guy knows the SEC and he knows how to coach, recruit, and look, when you have a when you're a defensive coordinator on an offensive coordinator's staff and you're really good at your job, like Pete Golding was, you're the head coach of the defense. That offensive head coach is focusing most of his time with the offensive staff. So I'm curious to see how Ole Miss bounces back from this, how they perform in the playoffs with Pete Golding as their head coach. Lane took a number of their offensive staffers, took their GM. They're all already in Baton Rouge now. Charlie Weiss Jr. is in Baton Rouge. A number of their recruiting personnel, Lane has taken them to LSU already. But look, I think the biggest question, and not to delay this even longer, the biggest question for me, for all the talking heads out there, for should Ole Miss's AD Keith Carter have allowed Lane to stick with the team despite accepting the LSU head coaching job? I mean, if you see in his statement right here, Lane says they wanted to invest everything into a playoff run, putting guardrails in place to protect the program in any areas of concern. Now, I don't know what that means, putting guardrails in place, but essentially the concern was, why would you hold on to a coach who is under contract with another school, especially one of your rivals? Why would you let that guy coach in the playoffs when he's going to be recruiting against you for the future and for another school, one of your rivals? So I completely understand Keith Carter not being okay with Lane sticking around, because it only, like, realistically only negative stuff happens there. But the other aspect of it really is, this is Ole Miss's best season in program history. At what point do you just say, Lane, we're not happy you're leaving. We're not happy with your decision, but you built this program. It's been 6 years. This is the best season in our history. We had like 110-win season in the last 20 years before this. You just won 10 games in like three or the last 4 seasons. Go finish the job. We'll worry about the future from here. I don't know the realistic possibilities of that happening, but I feel like if you were a coach who had built the program and led to that position, you want to finish it out. Or if you're a player, you want to finish it out with that coach. And so you see where Lane's coming from too. I just don't know if Ole Miss had a choice at that point. I don't know what those guardrails that Lane is mentioning would have been. And Ole Miss is on their own now with Pete Golding, moving into LSU itself with Lane. Look, I think Lane's an excellent head coach. He built a damn good Ole Miss team. We know that. And he built a really good offense, and that's what he knows to do. Why would you take the LSU job? It's because offensive coordinators, offensive head coaches can often do more with less on the offensive side because they're such scheme geniuses, but they'll never get the body types they need at I hate calling Ole Miss a smaller program, but at a smaller program compared to LSU, they won't get the body types they need along the defensive line without having to overpay for them in the portal. Well, now he's going to LSU, where if they hold on to Blake Baker, who's an excellent defensive coordinator, and they basically tell him, bro, you're the head coach of the defense. You do what you need to do. You bring in the guys you need to bring in. I'll take care of the offense. We're going to go win a lot of games. And I think that's the mission, because a lot of really great and elite players in the country are going to want to go to LSU now, not only to play for Lane offensively, but they're going to go to LSU to be a Tiger defensively, to go win a lot of games as an LSU Tiger defensively. So that's the appeal of LSU. I think there's a lot of people out there right now saying that LSU is not as much of a good job in 2025 as it was in 2012. You might be right. It's a different era in college football. Ole Miss has a lot of money. They can pay a lot of money for players. It's just easier for Lane at LSU to build a national title winning team. And I think that was the draw. There's, like I said at the beginning of this whole the beginning of this whole rant, I thought personally that Lane might want to go and build his own legacy, build a statue of himself at Ole Miss. People are driven by different things, man. And Lane's an alpha head coach. He's a genius offensive coordinator. I expect him to be really good. And that offense should be really damn good with the recruiting potential that they already have. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. Think about this. Brian Kelly was fired like 6 weeks ago. They still have the number 13 or 12 or 13 recruiting class in the country. Ole Miss had their best season under Lane Kiffin, and in program history, goes 11-1. They're 20th in the country. That is the example. It's not the fact that you can't get good players at Ole Miss. It's not the fact that you can't get the best defensive players that Lane would need to complement his offense. It's the fact that at LSU, even though there's been a fired head coach, there's a ton of kids out there, high profile kids, that are still lining up to be a Tiger despite who the head coach is. So good for Lane. Look, I'm just glad the saga is over. Ole Miss, good for them for jumping quickly at the next job. Hopefully it works out for Pete Golding. Hopefully it works out for Lane Kiffin at LSU. If he builds them up, man, I don't think it's going to take very long. I think he probably, I would assume he probably needs an offseason to get that offense humming. Maybe another 2 years from now, they're like, oh man, that's a team no one wants to play. It's also funny to me that he's kind of completed. He's now coached at every one of the places that Ed Orgeron was a head coach or an interim coach at. He was an interim at USC, interim at Ole Miss, head coach at LSU. Lane's been a head coach at all three, and more power to him. You get to choose what you want to do. This is America. You get to choose where you want to go. So Michigan hires Kyle Whittingham to be their next head coach. And like I said off the top, I think there's a number of different ways to go around this. This is a 5-year deal, $41 million. Basically, the essential opportunity for them to stabilize the program, to finally to bring in a coach that everyone has good things to say about him. And maybe if you think it's a bridge, that at least the next time you go hire a coach, it's not going to be under scandal or your coach leaving for the NFL amidst scandal, which is the last two coaches that have left. So off the top, I love the hire. But I've seen a lot of people kind of, I think bashing is the wrong word. I've seen some Michigan fans disappoint. I've seen some rival of Michigan fans saying, like, just having some fun at Michigan's expense for the hire, which I just don't get. Kyle Whittingham has been the head coach at Utah since like 2005. He took over for Urban Meyer. Guys, there's a documentary that's been out for several years about where Urban Meyer went next after Utah. And then Urban Meyer had another chapter at Ohio State. Oh, and then Urban Meyer had another chapter with the Jaguars. A brief chapter, but a chapter. Kyle Whittingham's been a head football coach in the NCAA for a very long time. And that's not just because the guy, you don't coach that long without knowing how to adapt to the sport. And I know the biggest changes in college football have come by in the last 5 or so years, and a lot of coaches, we keep saying, are apt to retire or apt to maybe look for NFL opportunities because they don't like the direction or the trajectory of the sport. With that said, there were plenty of changes from 2005 until 2020 in college football, and you're not a head coach in the NCAA in college football without knowing how to adapt, knowing how to change, knowing how to adjust to the current landscape, whatever that may be. If I told you before Michigan announced their hire, before Michigan fired Sharon Moore, and before we knew anything about Kenny Dillingham, Kellen DeBoer, whatever it is, if I told you that Michigan went out and hired a coach that had a 177-88 record, in bowl games he's 11-6. He has 23 ranked wins over top 25 opponents, 7 ranked wins over top 10 opponents. He led Utah to 18 winning seasons in 21 years, 8 10-win seasons. He has 3 conference titles. He's been a national coach of the year 3 different times. He's been a conference coach of the year 3 different times. He's been to a near Six Bowl or a big-time bowl game 4 times. He's 2-2 in those games, often having a far worse roster. He's had 35 All-Americans, over 60 NFL draft picks. Like, he's his current team's all-time winning coach. He's been the second longest tenured head coach in in all of college football for active. So if I told you all those stats without telling you who he is, you'd be like, damn, Michigan pulled a home run. And there's people out there saying this is just a bridge coach. Michigan failed on option A, option B, option C, so they had to settle for option D. One thing is when Michigan when Michigan fired Sharon Moore, Kyle Whittingham wasn't an option. Kyle Whittingham was still the head coach of Utah. And I think I have plenty to talk about the Utah side of this, but as Kyle Whittingham himself put it, he wasn't in the transfer portal at that time. And Utah, whatever happened there happened. He became available. Michigan will never tell us who they went out and looked at, but at least what's been reported is they were trying to talk to Kalen DeBoer. They were trying to talk to Kenny Dillingham. They were trying to talk to Jeff Brom. What's been reported since, though, is that Kalen DeBoer, obviously, we saw him say he's very happy at Alabama. He came out with a release committing to the future at Alabama, committing to Greg Byrne, no matter what happens in the playoff. I know that was a big conversation about, is Kalen DeBoer heading to Michigan if he lost to Oklahoma last week. Then there was the Kenny Dillingham thing. It's been reported now, and Kenny Dillingham himself said it, that he never received an offer from Michigan. He never talked to Michigan. Jeff Brom, it's been reported that he never received an offer from Michigan. So the only coach that we know that's gotten an offer from Michigan is Kyle Whittingham. Look, maybe they went and swung for the fences. Maybe they tried to get Nick Saban to come out of return. But none of that. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I would assume they probably had really high-level candidates on their list. But the one that we can report and talk about that's received the offer was Kyle Whittingham. So, doing a full autopsy on Michigan itself before we get into more Kyle Whittingham, Michigan is one of the true blue blood programs that's just had a tumultuous last 10 or so years. The Harbaugh era obviously promised stability. It promised an adult in the room. It promised a coach who's uber addicted to coaching football, winning games, and finding any way to win the game. The Harbaugh era also included an offensive coordinator that was arrested for an offensive assistant that was arrested for pretty disgusting acts and hacking into computers, trying to get personal information and images of student athletes. The Harbaugh era included a couple different smaller scandals of like Harbaugh paying for a cheeseburger. Like that's so stupid. This is 2025 now, or almost 2026. I feel like buying a cheeseburger or coffee for a college kid is acceptable, but that was also under the NCAA rules, which we don't need to get into right now. Harbaugh era also included the cheating scandal and Connor Stallions. And I think it's been reported that over like 7 to 11 Harbaugh staffers have either been fired or banned from the sport or arrested since Harbaugh was hired at Michigan. And then Sherrone Moore. And we know what's happened to him in the last 2 weeks, but Sherrone Moore was the guy who stepped in as interim when Harbaugh was suspended for the cheeseburger gate, and he won a couple games. I would argue that I could have stepped in those with that team that Harbaugh built and would won a couple games too. Maybe not against Ohio State, but the early ones. And then Sherrone Moore stepped in and was the interim for the Ohio State game and some of the bigger games when Harbaugh was further suspended by the NCAA. And do you remember? I mean, when the team had taken off, flown to play at Penn State, and Harbaugh was told on the plane, basically, that you're suspended, you can't coach this game, was dead set on leading that team, or so it appeared at least. And when Harbaugh left for the NFL, obviously, I think two things can be true. I think he probably had sights on coaching in the NFL, especially after he led Michigan to a national title win, which happened. But I also think the second thing can be true, that he wanted to leave town before NCAA got more damning evidence or whatever on that cheating stuff that would end up hurting him and his legacy at Michigan. I understand that it always exists and people today will talk about it, but maybe you disagree with me. I fully believe that if history is written by the victors, and to the victors go the spoils. Those are two very generic sayings, but I fully believe that if Harbaugh had stayed at Michigan and the NCAA was then able to come down with more of a hammer. We already reacted to this months ago about what the punishment that Michigan actually got. But if Harbaugh was there, you assume that the punishment might have been a little bit harsher. I don't know what would have happened to him. I don't know if they would have been forced to fire him. I don't know if he would have just stepped down. But his legacy there, especially being a former student athlete and a national title winning coach, would have been tarnished a little bit. But to the victors go the spoils, maybe not to you right now, but in 30 years, 20 years, when people are just looking at the college football record books, Michigan won the national title under Jim Harbaugh. They're not going to see all the scandals if they're just going down the football reference page of looking at like the national titles in history or best college coaches in history, blah, blah, national title winning head coaches in history. When that happened, Harbaugh left to the NFL, and he left at a pretty inopportune time. The transfer portal, I think, was already open and closed. And when coaches leave, the transfer portal only opens up for your team for 30 days. So at that point, Michigan wasn't able to go get new kids who hopped in the portal, but their kids could jump and leave. They hire Sharon Moore to be their head coach to stabilize the program, or so they thought, and be the bridge, because it was an inopportune time. It wasn't the best time to go find the best candidate head coach. But they thought, if we hire Sharon, the kids love him, we're going to be able to stabilize the program. We're going to be able to keep kids from hopping in the portal and have a fighting chance for next year. And then we saw what happened in Sharon Moore's first year. They couldn't throw the forward pass because they poorly calculated the quarterback ability that they had there. And then obviously what's gone on since, they paid Bryce Underwood a ton of money to come to Michigan. The defense had a ton of draft picks that were holdovers from the Harbaugh era that left, and Michigan looked a bit like a shell of itself this past year. They looked fine, they looked competitive, but it wasn't anything special. And it kind of proved to me and proved to probably everyone else that Sharon Moore was a bridge hire. I don't think Sharon Moore was in Michigan's plans and like to be their long-term head coach, to be one of those, call them statue guys, like the guys that you foresee if everything goes right, if you as an athletic department keeps supporting him in the way you should, that he down the road would be like a field name after Sharon Moore kind of guy, or a statue built for the guy. He wasn't a statue guy for Michigan. He was the best option in the January window when they had to hire a head coach. But then things got off the rails a little bit. Obviously, Sharon got fired for the inappropriate relationship. He got arrested for his actions after the firing, and I have no idea what he's doing now, but the bridge hire ended up also happening at a pretty poor time. And I'm kind of convinced at this point that Michigan probably wanted to fire him earlier and knew that if they had tangible, credible evidence to fire him after the Ohio State loss this year, that they would have, but they didn't have that evidence. We know that the lady in question who had the inappropriate relationship with Sharon provided the tangible evidence on the day of his firing. So that's how they were able to fire him for cause for that relationship. So long autopsy short, Sharon Moore now gets fired. Michigan is once again hiring a head coach at an inopportune time. A little bit more opportune than when Harbaugh up and left for the NFL, but still not the best time. And we knew about the Kalen DeBoer stuff. We knew about the Kenny Dillingham stuff. But as I mentioned earlier, we also know that those guys didn't necessarily get a job offer to be the Michigan head coach. And the transfer portal opens January 2nd, this coming week. Michigan needed a head coach before the transfer portal opens. So whether it's to keep their current players on the staff, the roster, or just to be able to go out and replenish the roster with the next coach's vision. So that is the little autopsy in general. Michigan itself, though, is a incredible opportunity for any head coach. I think there were some murmurs in the last week that is Michigan finding out that they're not as big a brand as they are, or as they're not as attractive a job as they are. And I know Michigan hasn't been, they had a spurt over the last 6 years of being uber successful. But then 15 years before that, they were pretty down, up and down for a little while. So I know Michigan hasn't been like the most consistently talented superpower in the Big Ten or nationally over the last 15, 20 years. But that block M means something. Being a Michigan Wolverine means something. And being able to, look, the resources present at Michigan right now, with Larry Ellison and their NIL board and their collective, the fact that like some players, coaches would take a discount to play or coach for Michigan, all of that exists. Sherrone Moore had 2 top 10, top 11 recruiting classes in the 2 years, and we've seen just recently an article came out just mentioning the dysfunction that was the Sherrone Moore era at Michigan. That Sherrone Moore wasn't talking to Wink Martindale. He had frequent blow-ups. And this isn't just about like on-field coaching or the scandals. This guy, it genuinely seemed dysfunctional in that program. So the opportunity to upgrade for Michigan was at an all-time high as it is. And now we look at who they got. Kyle Whittingham. I think if you took a poll around the nation of who is the most respected, which head coach do you respect the most? Whose team plays harder for them than that you expect? Who gets the most out of less? If Kyle Whittingham's not number 1 amongst the nationwide poll, he's number 2 at least. Kyle Whittingham has led Utah. I spurted off the stats, but I think people don't understand. He has led Utah through 3 conferences, started in the Mountain West, became a Pac-12 school, built that school up to become the class of the Pac-12. He won a conference when Mario Cristobal was the head coach at Oregon. He won the conference when Lincoln Riley and Dan Lanning were head coaches in the Pac-12. So he built that program from a top-tier Mountain West team to struggling early in the Pac-12 to bringing in even better players, building up an identity and a culture to put on a good product at Rice Eccles, and made them amongst the top 2 or 3 teams in the Pac-12 year in, year out. He had a ton of 10-win seasons. He had everything you could want from your head coach. And then he also, by doing all that, he made them attractive enough to survive the Pac-12 exodus and join another Power 4 conference. It's not the Big Ten, it's not the SEC, it's the Big 12. It's still a Power 4 conference, and Utah very well could have been left out. Look, I understand Utah is a much more central location in the United States than Pullman, Washington, or Corvallis, Oregon. But when Utah entered the Pac-12 in the early 10s, and if you just told a Pac-12 person, hey, in about 12 years, 13 years, 80, 90% of your conference is going to leave for other conferences, but the ones that are historically the worst programs, or at least in lower rated opportunities, they're going to get left behind. You probably would have included Utah in that list because they were a former Mountain West school. But now you're looking at it, Utah was attractive enough to join the Big 12. Oregon State and Washington State were left behind. So Kyle Whittingham, I have to start talking about Kyle Whittingham there, because I don't think people realize how impressive making your team attractive enough to go from a Group of 5 conference to a Power 5 conference, and then surviving another exodus to stay in the P4. And he made them very attractive and competitive again this year. They lost to BYU and Texas Tech. They had the misfortune of playing those 2 programs who were the class of the Big 12 this year. By the way, Texas Tech and BYU have much more resources available to them than Utah does. So I think this is a home run hire. I think Scott Bell came out with a tweet, and I'm sure all of you have seen it, from Kyle Whittingham, about Kyle Whittingham, that said, Kyle Whittingham follows 5 women on Instagram. All are fully clothed, and the majority of them are related to him. He has 0 posts in the last 11 plus years, hiring grade A+. Obviously having fun with the fact that like Kyle Whittingham, the person and the head football coach, is probably as opposite from Sherrone Moore as possible. So if your goal was just to wipe the slate clean and stabilize the program, you did the job. Kyle Whittingham's the adult in the room. Kyle Whittingham builds a culture, a togetherness, and a program. He doesn't build a team, he builds a program. And that's what Utah is. Utah is in the position it is right now because of Kyle Whittingham. So I've seen people talk about like, well, how could you go hire a bridge coach? Look, you could hire a bridge coach. It's fine. I think 10, 15 years ago, if you hired a coach and you expected them only to be there for 3 to 5 years, you'd be a little disappointed. But the longest tenured coach in America right now is Kirby Smart. I think he's been at Georgia for about 10 years now. He's not going to leave Georgia for another college program. Maybe he'll leave for the NFL at some point. But he's at his alma mater. If you are truly expecting your coach to be at your program for longer than 5-6 years, then maybe your standards for winning are not as high as you think they are, or you are living in the past. It doesn't matter if it's a bridge coach. It doesn't matter if he was planning on retiring this year. What he did at Utah was so impressive. The way he was able to build, the way he was able to modernize his offense this year, and he did that not having the most resources in his conference, or not even being near the top of his conference in NIL funding, in being able to retain his players, in any of the top metrics that is required to win in college football today. So now he goes to Michigan, and he has the big brand behind him. He has that logo behind him. He has all the NIL resources behind him. For better or for worse, two things can be true. You can, one, hire a bridge coach, or you can call it, as you could call it, a bridge coach. I don't think Kyle Whittingham's going to be there for 15 years. He's in his mid-60s. He's probably not going to be there until his 80s. But let's say he's there until his early 70s. Two things can be true. One, you can hire a bridge coach, but two, he can be an upgrade over your past coach. Regardless of anything, if Kyle Whittingham was available on December 1st and the rumors of him retiring weren't out there, do you realize how many other programs would have reached out to him? Do you realize how many other people would have lined up an offer ready for Kyle Whittingham because of how respected that he is and how ready to win he is if he just has resources? He's been doing everything he's done so far with far fewer resources. A lot of times taking the field against teams who have a talent advantage over him, and he beats them. And I'm so excited to watch the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry take another level this year. Kyle Whittingham, for those who don't follow a lot of Utah football or Big 12 football or Pac-12 football in the past, he's a level 1, grade A shit talker. He hates his rivals. And that Michigan-Ohio State game, especially once Whittingham gets his feet settled, gets some of his players in, starts building his culture, maybe not year one, but when it's his team, truly his team, there's going to be some real high levels of animosity at Michigan for Ohio State and vice versa. It's going to feel like the Michigan-Ohio State rivalries of the past, not just what happened with the Sherrone Moore stuff. So I'm really excited for that. It's a massive upgrade. I don't think even if he was a bridge, it was a problem. I don't think even if it was a bridge for Michigan that it's a problem. I think what they need right now more than anything is to find a coach that will allow them to not only win and build a program, build a strong culture again, but also have a coach that if he chooses to retire, leave, or go into whatever he wants, go into TV in 3 to 5 years, that job is only attractive, but it's also a ready to win culture building and team for whenever he chooses to leave. So I think Michigan really knocked the ball out of the park, and it's just going to be a situation that Kyle Whittingham is going to really be able to succeed at Michigan, hopefully for a long term, but if not, at least for a short term. He's bringing in a lot of Utah staffers. He's bringing in Jason Beck, his offensive coordinator, who he was able to bring up from New Mexico last year because he needed to modernize his offensive system. This is a coach that, yes, he's in his 60s, but he's able to adapt. So I'm very excited to see how Michigan goes forward from here. I do want to talk a little bit about the Utah side of it. It was kind of gross. I'm not going to be the one to say that I didn't expect him to leave Utah. I think I don't know, maybe it was mid-November when I said, Jace, just watch out. This might be Kyle Whittingham's last game as a college football coach, or at least as a Utah coach. I don't know. His comments at the end seemed like he was retiring. Last year, at the end of the year, he had to come out with a statement just announcing that he's coming back to Utah for another year and not retiring. So all signs pointed to him retiring. Morgan Scalley, who's now the new head coach, had been with Kyle Whittingham for years, and it just was a weird situation, man. I don't know if Scalley told Utah saying like, hey, make me the coach now or I'm going to leave, or if Kyle pulled the rug out from under them, having told them all year that, yeah, he's going to retire, and then had a change of heart last second and wanted to stay. But at that point, the plan was already in place for them to hire Morgan Scalley, and they basically had to get him, kick him out. I don't know. Maybe I'm an idealist. Maybe I'm a romantic. If my coach has been at my program since 2005, if my coach is the all-time winningest coach in my program's history, if my coach has won conference title games, if my coach has done more for my program than I could ever imagine, then I want to give him a good send-out. Even if he wants to leave to go coach Michigan, I would want to make sure that the guy who's built the program up is given as many opportunities as possible to stay. So I think it was gross how Utah handled this. If I understand a plan could have been in place for Morgan Scalley to be the coach and Whittingham pulled the rug out from under them, I just think it is nasty if the conversation in the Utah athletic department was, well, we're going to hire this first-time head football coach, even though he's been on the staff for years, but we're going to hire a first-time head football coach to replace our legendary coach. Our legendary coach wants to return for another year and wants to stay here, and we're going to say no. They said no to him. They forced him out. They forced him into retirement, or as Whittingham called it, they forced him into the transfer portal for the coaches. So Michigan got a gift by this. Utah screwed this up royally. I do think, though, maybe all feelings have been hurt at this point, but I do think just with what Kyle's done there, how much he means to that fan base, whenever it's all said and done for him as a coach, he's going to be remembered as the Utah head football coach. He's going to be remembered for what he did there. He's probably going to get a statue and a field named after him at Utah. But the fact that there was a coach in waiting situation that mattered more to the Utah athletic department than giving their legendary coach another year at least, bonkers. I would much rather tell Morgan Scalley, okay, we'll call your bluff. You don't want to be a DC for another year here, even though you've done this for a while. Go coach somewhere else or see if you can get another job, and then we'll get back to you. Maybe if Kyle retires next year, we'll try to hire you. But we'll call your bluff right now. I think all of that overall was just nasty to watch from a Utah standpoint for a coach that matters so much to their program. But whatever. I'm not a Utah fan. I'm not a Michigan fan. I just think in general this was a great hire by Michigan that they probably didn't expect to be making. And it was just a monumental error by the Utah athletic department.